Everyone, and welcome to the webinar number 2 for the Pacific Resilience Partnership. I will now hand over to the facilitators for today, who's Catherine Clarkson from IFRC and Siale from Piango. Catherine, over to you.
So very happy to be co-hosting this webinar today. I'm Catherine from IFRC, based in Suva, and I'm co-hosting with my colleague Siale from Piango. Siale, would you like to say any words, Siale? Otherwise, we pass to Susan, if you'd like to open this webinar today for us, please.
Thank you, Catherine, and Malo Siale. So just welcome everybody on behalf of the Technical Working Group on Localization and the Pacific Resilience Partnership. A very warm welcome to all of you who are able to join us today. In this current era of multiple hazards, compounded further by COVID-19, the need for effective local action based on strong local capacity is never more obvious. The Technical Working Group on Localization comprises various humanitarian and development actors from government, civil society, private sector, FBOs and CBOs, covering over 22 Pacific Island countries and territories. It's aimed at establishing communities of best practice through collaboration and knowledge sharing to further advance the localization agenda in the Pacific as outlined in the Framework for Resilient Development in the Pacific and the Grand Bargain Agreement. The TWG is co-chaired by Family Pacific, of which I am the Executive Director, Piango, Siale, and the Fiji Disabled People's Federation, Bulalani. May I add that as we learn and do knowledge sharing in this Talanoa series, let us also keep in mind the commitments of our governments and ourselves to meaningful inclusion of all diverse women in decision-making and at the local level, as passed through international commitments such as the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and so forth, and devolve further into our national policies and commitments. These include the support to local organizing by women-led and women's groups and people with disabilities and so on. The reality has been that all these years, they are already in the communities, and in a crisis setting, they are first responders, as they know the people, structures, and networks, amongst many others. The webinar today is part of that learning and knowledge sharing, and on behalf of my fellow co-chairs and TWG members, we look forward to an interactive and constructive Talanoa session. Rinaka Bakalevu.
Thank you, Susan. This our soft opening, should we call it, our soft opening for the webinar. The beginning of the series, the chair of the bigger group had launched the webinar series now for the technical working group of humanitarian localization. Susan is representing the co-chairs in welcoming everyone and to take the lead into the discussions. So we would like to invite three of our speakers. Vani from the FCOS, will ask Vani to just give a brief introduction of herself and her role. And we have Vanessa from Tonga from the youth. And then we will ask Lani from the disability perspective to share from the technical working group, also as her role as the co-chairs. So these sessions we would be hoping to articulate a little bit more in terms of what do we mean by humanitarian localizations, and showcase some of the work that our local NGOs are doing in the ground and bringing their perspective into the regional platform of the technical working group on the humanitarian localizations. So with that, I would like to invite Vani. Vani, please just have a quick introduction of yourself to the rest of those that are listening in, and then straight into your presentation. Thank you, Vani.
Thanks, Siale, Sue, and friends from Forum Secretariat. Yes, I'm Vani Vattanasinghe, and I work for the Fiji Council of Social Services. I have exactly 10 minutes, so I'll quickly go through just perhaps an introduction and some of the lessons learned. Is that okay, Siale? All right. I'll probably start with an introduction, a background into FCOS's role as mandated under the Natural Disaster Management Act 1998. You know, when I first took up this role in 2018, we were quickly reminded of our role to coordinate civil society organizations under this act. But if you read into the act, one of the key things that stand out about the act based on some of our experiences and learning so far is that the act is quite ahead of its time in terms of localization. You know, there are layers of humanitarian coordination that's written into the act from the national to the subnational. There are clear roles that different government departments play. As for civil society organizations, in terms of the act, there are two that are mandated, of course, Red Cross as we know it, and Fiji Council of Social Services. There's a disaster council that is established by the act. Under the disaster council, or the National Disaster Council, there is the National Emergency Committee, there's a preparedness committee, there's an additional committee, but the disaster council is what FCOS and Red Cross sit on. FCOS also sits on the emergency committee and the preparedness committee. When you look at the various levels of coordination, when you're thinking about localization, this act is quite good because it specifies how coordination will be done from the national to subnational level. It goes right down to district level. In fact, Section 33 of the Act talks about district officers playing a role in coordinating civil society organizations. Where it falls short is that while it names FCOS and Red Cross specifically as members of the various layers of coordination at the national level, it doesn't specify, exactly how or what roles they can play apart from what's described in the Act about the different membership of the committees. So there's a bit of also an overlap in that. Three things. I know that I've already used up about 3 minutes. So in the next 7 minutes, I just want to talk about the lessons learned. Let me just give you an overview about some of the work that we have done as FCOS. So far in 2020, we've had 3 tropical cyclones and of course COVID-19, which we've had to deal with. No one anticipated COVID-19, but one of the key things that we, now looking back at the last few months, one of the key things that we've really learned as a network is the importance of legal structures as an enabling environment for local and community responders. While the Act was quite ahead of its time, as I said, in terms of ensuring localization, it wasn't enough. And I had shared a bit about Section 33, where the district officers actually coordinate what and how CSOs intervene at that level. What we had done through the support of the Australian Humanitarian Partnership, particularly through our partners Child Fund Australia and Plan International, was to develop a CSO protocol for subnational coordination. In 2019, we had gone down to our members, and of course, it's of course a membership-based organization, you know, just consulting and developing that protocol, because we had done a national consultation in 2018 and learned that there was a lot of activities happening at the national level, but at the subnational level where communities were facing you know, the brunt of the natural disasters, there was really sort of a bottleneck, you know, that was delaying support, sometimes life-saving to communities. So our first priority was in developing a protocol that would allow us to bridge that gap. So we went to work in 2019 developing a protocol to help us develop that, not knowing that in 2020 we would put it to the test. So it was a baptism of fire of sorts, but it really helped us to deploy around 120 to 300 volunteers when we were responding to COVID-19 and TC Herald, when we were called upon by government to support them with you know, risk communication and community engagement. For COVID-19, we also assisted with contact tracing, with LTDD campaigns. Even though our role is really to coordinate, we found that we had to go further and directly respond because there was a vacuum in the humanitarian space when COVID-19 hit, because a lot of NGOs then said we would work from home. That left us to really work in that gap. So there were volunteers that were mobilized across Viti level and Vono level, working alongside government to support that. You know, we really have to take our hats off to our HP partners, Child Fund, and of course our lead in Fiji's plan, for helping us to prepare effectively in 2019 for what would happen in 2020. The second lesson was around, you know, the importance of scenario planning and making sure that you at least develop a minimum standards for a response as a network. And in developing that, making sure that it's grounded in ensuring dignity to communities. And you can't have that conversation if you don't have community responders in the room to lead that conversation, because they have the lived experiences. We're thankful, of course, to our partners who gave us the support to convene those spaces for discussions on values, because the discussion on values brings people together, rather than, you know, going on approaches which usually ends up being a discussion on positions. That is key, especially when you're relying on volunteers to do response. They drive the work, and that bridges all kinds of divides, including fear, which we encountered when we were you know, working on COVID-19. So, you know, we went into discussions around the development of a CSO code of conduct, which is still in draft, and we're about to go to national consultations. I have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go into the third lesson, which is readiness of development partners for mobilization phases. And I think this is tied in a way to, you know, ensuring having space for scenario planning. You know, one of the things that we struggled with as, of course, is that there were strengths in communities that we wanted to tap on, to use, to build on, to build resilience in Fijian communities. But, you know, the financing structures, the global financing structures are such that you have to really maneuver. They're not built to listen to that. So, you know, you know, are we going to use this to build our, you know, mechanisms for resilience, or build it around a system that, you know, that takes a bit more time, takes a bit more resources to develop? So we're thankful for partners like Piango, you know, who understand the Pacific context, the values, you know, the work around their research on localization with HAG. But all in all, I think when we look back, you know, when people ask us, how did you cover around 12,000 households? And that's really because we've had, you know, support from partners. We've really learned to listen well to our constituents, and to rock the boat a bit in terms of negotiating for resources and capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vani. I think you had brought to attention of the group 3 main learning. You were talking about the legal structures, the enabling environment. There's quite a key. You have been sharing the CSO protocol that you have done in 2019, and that has really put a test how FCOS has been identifying the gaps between the national and the subnational, and how you step in to make sure that the rapid response is provided to communities, and not just at the national level. You had also touched base on the coordination gaps that FCOS had to jump in and make sure that they also directly response to COVID because of the situations, and our international partners has been called to work from home because of the uncertainty and the unprecedented nature of the COVID. And you touch base on the preparedness, the importance of that, the working on the code of conduct for the humanitarian work, and how we see the development partners supporting our local NGOs, particularly when a lot of the thinking on humanitarians is responding when something is happening, and how much do we invest in preparing when we don't know when it does hit. So that's just a quick sum up of what Vani has been sharing, just so it can help our listeners in terms of their preparing to ask questions. Please use the chat box in the Zoom, the platform, online platform, and write any of your questions, so our coordinating team can make sure that we respond to your questions. The next speaker is Vanessa Lolohea from Tonga. Vanessa is the director of the Tonga National Youth Congress, and I think it's, as we have always been thinking about our young people, that they are the manpower in our community when there's a disaster. But Vanessa will be sharing how they have been coordinating the young people in terms of their response to a humanitarian response. Vanessa, space is yours.
I'm Vanessa Lolohea. From the Tonga National Youth Congress. We have, I'll talk about our response in our humanitarian section from the Tonga National Youth Congress. We have started our work on humanitarian around the Cyclone Ian around 2014. Then from Cyclone Ian to Cyclone Kita, and also to Cyclone Harold. On our response, we have free activities that we have implemented. We implemented before the cyclone. We have done a retrofitting program with evacuation centers around Tonga. What we do, we set up committees with the local villages That's the emergency evacuation committee. Then we do the response during the cyclones of respond with our water purification activities. That's we do turning of on desalination unit and sky hydrant. Then we also do a lot of water distribution, especially to small island, outer island around Hapai, Vava'u, and also the two newest of using the desalination unit. Then we have also a system of using the sky hydrant and also doing training on hygiene and sanitation. After the cyclones, we have a livelihood program that we do on seed distribution, seed saving, and we also actually and also planting material on crops that we distribute, that it will help only a few months before the cyclones and you harvest it. So our work on humanitarian side, we use the same approach on Cyclone Ian, Cyclone Kita, Cyclone Harold. What we do with our partner here in Tonga, we work in partnership with Caritas, also Tonga Red Cross, the Council of Churches, the Tonga Trust, and also the church group who are implementing on the ground on the activity, in the humanitarian activity. And we have worked in partnership on Cyclone Ian, on Cyclone Kita, and Cyclone Harold. We do this so that we don't duplicate on distribution and also on water purification and also on the livelihood response. We also work with NEMO. They have given us a cluster system where we, as NGO, move in with, not moving, as NGO work together in partnership with the government, especially on if it is water purification, it's headed by the Ministry of Health and also the Geology Department. So every different cluster, we have 10 different cluster in Tonga, and it's headed by different ministry. So we have been working on Cyclone Harold and Cyclone Kita with that system, and we haven't. We find that we have a lot of challenge, especially in the working with on the cluster system, mainly because of our volunteer group. We haven't yet developed a policy for our volunteer. Each organization or CSO who's working on with under the cluster, they have faced the same challenges on the volunteer policy. Although each of us, each of the organization have developed their that they abide by, but there isn't yet a national policy so that it's developed for us volunteer to work with. So we have find that that's a lot of challenge, especially when we are partnering with the ministry on doing distribution and also doing training to villages and also to community. We also have worked with a few with the CSO level. We are trying to get so much on mobilizing volunteer and also community member committee, so that we will have formalized a kind of a cluster on the CSO, so that we will be able to work more independently. Not independently on the basis of having the funding, but it's more on making the decision to do respond work on the ground. What I meant by this is the most of our community and most of the CSO have had few partner with international NGOs and also agents. So what they have said that it's needed from their members in the ground, on the ground, it's different from what the government or the ministry show. In that case, we are, us as CSO, we are asked to again write in a proposal and justify the funding from the cluster. In terms of emergency, we don't have the time to do.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think our system seems to be working well in terms of just cutting off people when they're talking over their time. I think there's a kind of a drop off from there with their connections, but we will take this opportunity to get our next speaker, Lani, to share with us the work of the technical working group, but at the same time also share her perspective from the disability in terms of the humanitarian. So Lani is here with us at Piango office, so I'll ask Lani to continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Siale, and good afternoon and good morning to the viewers that are listening in. As been introduced, I'm Lanieta Pimambo from the manager for the Fiji Disabled People's Federation, and also co-chair of the technical working group on localization. I will be presenting this afternoon on the we have just completed a survey on mapping of localization actors in the region, and it's currently been analyzed. So I will be briefly summarizing a few of the key findings from the survey, and we'll be also sharing a detailed explanatory on screen with the support of Piango. In this survey, we were able to, there were 123 respondents from humanitarian organizations and also for actors. that responded from 21 Pacific Island countries and territory. We see that this is a great number that have responded to this mapping survey. And few of the from the key messages, sorry, and looking at the areas of focus, majority of the respondents were local or actors. Most of the responded organization works across 15 cross-cutting thematic areas, such as shelter, gender, disability, human mobility, coordination, and so forth. Just looking at the key challenges of opportunities, opportunities of localization. We looked at capacity building and development. We also looked at funding resources and mobilization. We also looked at governance accountability, and last, the gender equality, social inclusion, as four of the major thematic areas, which we have shared a detail of these areas of focus that was looked at the survey. I believe, just to expand from the fourth area around gender equality, social inclusion, and we just adding on in terms of disability inclusion, and what does it mean for us as organization of persons with disabilities in a humanitarian space or humanitarian actors, is that fundamentally it is people with disabilities at the center of any humanitarian action. We are best fitted to advocate on issues that affect us during a disaster. So for the Fiji Disabled People's Federation, we have been working very hard around building the capacity of our own people to prepare them and also respond before, during a peacetime, and also in a disaster response phase. And we have localization for us is nothing about us without us. So we have been working in the spaces of and we are also thankful to our regional organizations under the Pacific Emergency Response Unit for the technical advice around the humanitarian space, and also building the capacity of national organizations of persons with disability to that are able to respond. So at the organizational level, we have our national DRR resource teams, and also at the community level, we have our national, subnational DRR resource teams that are mobilized during a preparedness or response phase of any disasters. And we are now, as we're in the COVID-19, we are also building capacity of our people with disability to also have a better understanding of COVID-19, and also are able to then share the knowledge that is learned, so that people with disability are protected and safe during any emergency situation. So, and also for in that, having said that, we also work very closely with various civil society organizations, and also at the regional level on few of the organizations that we work with, the Shifting the Power Coalition and a few other regional organizations and local actors that are able to mainstream disability inclusion into the work of the humanitarian space. So we see that this has been really working well, and we are also closely working with our National Treaty Council of Social Services in terms of the CSO protocol, even with the live and learn on the emergency response EOC trainings to government officials at the divisional level, making sure that people with disabilities are able to be supported and are also able to be part of a response team during a disaster. So these are just few of the points that I added from the survey, but we are looking forward to the findings of the whole survey to then inform us of the area and the challenges and the good work that we as local actors continuously in our different organizations, but making a difference for people in the community and for all persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Vinata, Lani, that's a snapshot of what the mapping exercise that the Technical Working Group of Localizations is working on. We will be happy to share that with the rest of the stakeholders who have been participating in this online survey. I would like to give back the floor to Catherine, please, for the facilitating of the questions. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Siali, and thank you very much to our three speakers. I have a couple of questions already in the chat box. Please feel free to put your questions there. And I'm also interested in hearing from a few others from different sectors, which I might turn to you shortly after we answer these questions. First question, maybe to Vani, about the role of FCOS as coordination versus responder. Are you able to answer that one, Vani?
Sorry, was there a specific question on what our role was? Excuse the background noise, sorry.
Coordination mechanism or a responder mechanism? And do you see FCOS as have a response?
Sorry, I'm okay. So I'm just going to try and answer that generally. I think, you know, when you look through the act, there's nothing that specifies that our role is to coordinate. I think that is, there has been government's expectation since, you know, the act was enacted in 1998. And I think FCOS has, you know, had mixed experiences delivering on that mandate. I think the current review of the act, and I think Maya and a few others are on this call, on this Zoom call with me, and might be able to answer a few more questions around that. But yeah, there has been that expectations from government. I've seen that with this year's response and of course some of last year's responses. You know, that we would coordinate civil society organizations, and when there is disaster council meetings, there's often questions that are, posed by members of the disaster council, the different PSs, about, how civil society organizations can support their work, either through the clusters or at the divisional level. And I'm hoping that that the review process, and I think they're tying that up at the moment, and I've been given the end of the year as sort of the when the review will be completed, and I guess passed by Parliament. I'm hoping that the reviewed act will be a bit more clear about how and what AFCOS can do to support humanitarian coordination, both at the national and at the subnational level.
Thank you for that. And I wonder, I see, Maya is on the call. Maya, do you want to add anything to that answer from Vani, and also link to the second question that was posted around the overlap between pre-disaster and post-disaster, and how the Act deals with that?
Thank you very much for that, Catherine. Thank you, Vani, for that response. And thank you, Vani, for always being available for discussions on the bill, the disaster law bill for Fiji, as well as putting forward submissions, coordinating submissions from our NGO colleagues. So basically what we're trying to do is strengthen the role of AFCOS and Fiji Red Cross within the bill. And that is especially with regards to putting in their conditions or requirements or guidelines for volunteerism, as well as looking at humanitarian actors, realizing and recognizing certain humanitarian actors, which will be supported by both AFCOS and Fiji Red Cross within the Act, to enable certain facilities that can be offered to them as long as they meet certain requirements. And I think Vani has touched on having a code of conduct in place and setting some core standards for all of them to meet, as well as putting in place standards for reporting after post-disaster to ensure that we minimize as well as eliminate any issue with regards to misuse of funds, as well as misuse of goods that have entered the country for humanitarian aid. Can I request, please, Chair, if you can repeat the second question?
Yeah, the second question was just about how it allows phase. Could you hear that, Maya?
Yes, yes. So with regards to pre-disaster, looking at, I guess, the preparedness phase, strengthening the preparedness of all actors involved, as well as, I guess that's why we have to have those requirements in place, as Vani alluded to, having a code of conduct, as well as having a set requirement processes and procedures to be met. And this is largely so that NDMO can coordinate well and what resources are available from which humanitarian actors, as well as what resources are available on the ground within the affected areas to strengthen the coordination role, as well as implement a very effective response. Trying to strengthen, I guess, the preparedness phase with regards to disaster risk reduction, and that is getting each sector to take a stock code or stock take of the hazards or risks that they deal with or manage on a daily basis within their sectors, and then looking at how we can mainstream disaster risk reduction with regards to protecting against future risk or against hazards, progressing from hazards to actually a disaster. I hope that does help the question. If not, happy to elaborate further.
Thanks very much. No, that's great. While I don't see any other questions at the moment, please feel free to raise your hand as well. If you know how to do that at the bottom of the screen, you can put your hand up. But I might ask Alici Tunga from the private sector, or one of your members, if you have any on, if you are able to just give a comment about how the private sector dealt with perhaps the recent CC Harold within the COVID environment, and how you see that, yeah, things could be done better in preparation for the next cyclone season. Alicia, are you able to give a comment on that?
Yeah, sure. With regards to the cyclone and Harold, I think there are key lessons that we had learned from obviously Pam and Winston, and within the membership itself, particularly a handful of national private sector organizations, NPSOs, their established business councils. In the case of PG, for example, under FSEF, the PG Commerce and Employees Federation, it's a EPG Business Disaster Resilience Council, and the same similar grouping within the Vanuatu Chamber, and a few others have sort of informal loose networks within their chambers. What we've done since, a lot of it has really been around coordination, and if you're looking at, we're talking about localization, a lot of that has been really about mobilizing the membership and working across the private sector. Most people, when you talk about the private sector, and particularly if you look at the chambers and the representation within the chambers, they are largely, I guess, the bigger companies. So where do you bring in SMEs and then focus around preparedness particularly? Obviously, when cyclones and disasters happen, a lot of it is on response and recovery, post-rehabilitation or business rehabilitation, as well as humanitarian response. But I think since Pan and Winston, a lot of the attention has been going towards preparedness and how do we invest better in preparing our businesses. And that also relates to communities. The private sector in the Pacific, we recognize our employers, so we have to also respond to our employees and workers' situations and their needs, as well as businesses as providers of goods and services. But also private sector is what we like to refer to as an agent of change or a partner when it comes to the resilience agenda. So a lot of businesses obviously have corporate social responsibility elements, or resources where they can put the community. I think if you're looking at localization, and if you're looking at in-country assistance or partnerships, I think this is a good time to sort of, well, not maybe now because of COVID, and it sort of just compounded the issues within the private sector. But I think when we're looking at preparedness and sort of more targeted initiatives for response under the corporate social responsibility banner for most businesses, because that's where a lot of the funding is targeted to communities. And I guess traditionally, or mainly, a lot of it's linked to marketing. It's generally been around sports, for example. But a lot of businesses are mindful that, obviously commitments to SDGs, national development plans, and disaster more broadly and resilience is that there needs to be investment in education and health, also climate change and business resilience. So I think a lot of that work is really being spearheaded by our members, the Chambers of Commerce and Employer Federations, but also I want to point out that there are other industry associations, for example, the engineers and those in the telecom sector, which work very, very well and quite closely with governments and others when it comes to resilience and disaster risk.
Thank you, Alici. I think your mic was a bit in and out, but I think we picked up your key messages around the preparedness of businesses as well. It was brought up a couple of times already as well. I wonder as well if you there from OSCA, if you're able to make a comment just from the development partners side of things. So yeah, how you are looking to adjust COVID context and looking at localization.
Hi, Kathy. This is Tiara Eastman from USAID. We're no longer OFDA, but we're now the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. So we're responsible for the US government to monitor and respond and release funding to partners following the disaster, I think Tropical Cyclone Harold was for us very eye-opening in the Pacific. It really drove home sort of the localization agenda that we've you know, bought into and been working towards at the Pacific level, but also at the global level. For us, it really came through the importance of pre-positioning supplies in country, but also increasing the local manufacturing capacity of those relief supplies. So now in Fiji and to some extent in Vanuatu, we have new capacity to locally manufacture things that we would normally bring from, say, the other side of the world, Pakistan, other big markets. So I think that that aspect to us was a very key lesson learned. We also, you know, recognize the importance of the first responders, having local teams on the ground that can pivot and implement the response, you know, potentially with remote support, you know, procurement support or things that might need to come from the region. But I think that importance is, you know, even more highlighted in the days of COVID. Also for us, we saw the aerial surveys were important. We saw, thanks to New Zealand, we saw some early aerial footage from Kandavu and Fiji that was very informative. We saw some footage from Tonga that was also informative, but really nothing can replace the on-the-grounds needs assessment. So for us in our Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, we are focused on needs-based assistance. And so, you know, the aerial photo will tell us some things, but really we do need to have still that in-person assessment, and it can be quick, but that's where you get the multi-sectoral view in our assessment. Another challenge that we reflected on as a donor is that the Pacific, I think, has to some extent the lack of familiarity with the U.S. humanitarian system, which for us relies on a request from the host government. So we need for Fiji and Tonga, for our NDMO government counterparts to actually request or indicate that there's a need from international donor partners. And without that sort of request or that door open, we generally can't move forward with providing assistance. This forum has made me think a lot about sort of two questions. So I put these out back to sort of the group think here. First is, you know, how best can local NGOs views be communicated to the UN regional coordination and or donors kind of at the regional level? I think we as donors would love to hear from you all how you see that being improved or strengthened. And then also there's a lot of appreciation and intention from donors to try to gauge the capacity of the local actors on the ground and not overwhelm the capacity. I think we've seen this, in my personal experience, we've seen this happen in a place like Syria. So we're very conscious and sort of nervous that we not break the system, but really we would also like to hear from the local organizations on the ground how they see their own capacity. You know, what do you, how would you like us to look for that information, have that conversation with you? So thank you very much, Kathy. Handing it back over to you.
Thank you, Thierry. Yeah, great follow-up questions from you. And I see there's two other questions that have been posed in the chat, and so I might go to those first, and then if anyone has a response for Thierry's question. So the first question from Susan about the review, and I think this is related to the Fiji review. So I wonder if, Maya, are you again able to answer this, or somebody else? So is the review considering COVID or pandemic, and how whether NDMO should coordinate, the coordination mechanisms in multi-hazard? Maya, are you able to respond on that one again? Sorry.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. So one of the key things that we're looking at in the review, and would have been really great is if one of our colleagues from NDMO was on board, but unfortunately, I think they got the registration a bit late. But one of the key things we're looking at is a multi-hazard approach to disasters. and seeing how not only for biohazards under which COVID falls, but also under any types of hazards that occurs within Fiji, how it can, the response can be coordinated by NDMO in relation to a holistic whole of society, whole of government approach. And this would be because under the natural disaster management law that is currently in place, that's where the whole of government approach is taken. So we just need to strengthen that in order to coordinate for any other future disasters or hazards that may occur, or multiple hazards that occur at the same time. So for instance, at the end of all natural hazards, you usually have a lot of outbreaks that may occur. And these responses are co-coordinated by NDMO and health. In a lot of countries, they have an understanding of how to work with each other with regards to those types of disasters. But I guess now with regards to COVID-19, there needs to be a change in the way things are done and coordinated, and how I guess it's a learning curve for not only the Pacific, but you'll find that all the other countries in the world are also coming to terms with how they coordinate assistance and response during these times. And very hopeful that no other disasters befall us during these COVID-19 times, but at the same time, taking on the experiences from Fiji, as well as Solomon Islands, Tonga, and other countries that have already addressed both TC Herald and COVID-19, and learning from those experiences at hand. But yes, definitely we are looking at a multi-hazard approach, putting in place a multi-hazard warning system to deal with early warning and early actions that should be undertaken. Thank you.
The next question sort of follows on a little bit about that, around looking at multi-hazards. So in relation to coordination of NGOs. I wonder, Vani, would you be able to answer that from Fiji? Otherwise, Siali or one of your other members that coordinate NGOs at the country level, would you be able to answer that one?
Yeah, sorry, I'm outside. Well, you know, when just, you know, sharing an experience from earlier this year when, you know, CSOs met, some CSOs met when COVID had hit Fiji. We had convened a meeting of CSOs and written to the Minister for Health. And really was that email was to really inquire about, you know, how coordination would be done, what kind of support they needed from CSOs. You know, I think there was confusion around where we should contribute. Of course, we followed up with emails. We roped in the minister responsible for disaster management. Until maybe 2 months later, when the two ministers for foreign affairs and the minister responsible for disaster management then put out a call asking for support. And this time this was for both COVID-19 and TC Herald. You know, luckily for us, we had you know, support from Child Fund that helped us to quickly develop a risk communication and community engagement strategy, put us through online trainings, and this included our members, affiliates from across the country tuning in before we mobilized. So I think given those experiences, I think that, you know, in terms of, you know, responding to pandemics and you know, natural disasters, I think that they should be consolidated because at the community, at the subnational level, it really makes no difference if Ministry of Health, you know, is responsible or has a particular strategy. It needs to come together for the sake of clarity for communities. And when there are two agencies that are doing two different things, or two different community campaigns, it can become very confusing, particularly when you have civil servants who have to roll out particular messages and they haven't had time to really think that through, and they're rushing to meet their quota for communities. There really is only one way communication taking place. You know, there's a lot of fear and you don't have time to really, you know, answer questions from communities. That was our experience. So when we went into communities, because we've had some support from Child Fund and Plan, we were able to take a different approach. We visited families. We, you know, asked them questions around, you know, whether there was information coming through. We were able to communicate that back to both the divisional commissioners, ministries of health, and of course NDMO. So yes, we believe in a consolidated approach that's better for communities.
Ivani. And Siali, I wonder, are you able to make a comment on that same question and perhaps also the next question, which was about how to link up better between the local NGOs and the regional level in terms of coordination?
Hi, Catherine, can you hear me?
And the community
okay, my comment will be to John Hopkins' questions. Just addition to what Vani has responded. The interesting thing that we have observed from Piango at the regional level was that we have humanitarian architecture, humanitarian mechanisms in countries already in place, but that was kind of limited to cyclones. You know, we have a couple of clear directions on tsunami. We had you know, scenario test runs and all of that in our different countries on some of those disasters. We had no sense of the pandemic when we had it. So even when we have seen our members in countries like EFCOS and others responding to the COVID, it was really just out of their own decision to reach out, because it was clear that everyone was kind of in a freeze mode. And we were all looking at government to give us the directions. And we had all known that although the public health system has been part of the disaster mechanisms in countries, but they had never led any of the disaster response. Yeah, they were part of the WASH clusters. They were supporting clusters to the main NDMO lead humanitarian mechanisms in our different countries. So this, I would say, the first time that we had been expecting the health sector to take a leading role, but there was no clear direction, no mechanisms in place. And I say this with confidence that we had only seen the immediate response that has been in Fiji, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Tonga because of DC Herald. Yeah, when DC Herald, automatically things start falling into place, because we were now just, you know, we were just like default to what we had been using before. If we did not have DC Herald, it would, I would say that it would be a different response. We had seen when we have DC Herald, things just like starting to move because we then feel comfortable of the system that we had. And I will just wrap up my comments by just voicing out what Mia was explaining, how we need to probably revisit the Act in Fiji, the bill, allow perhaps another round of consultation to include our experience from the COVID-19, because we need to look into our humanitarian architecture and our humanitarian mechanism broadly, and not just to think of that as just a response to cyclone or response to tsunami, but use the pandemic as also another scenario, and maybe another scenario that we may have to put in place is some kind of a humanitarian response when it comes to the economic impact of COVID, because we haven't seen the end of that. What do we have in place when we look into a humanitarian situations in terms of our economic tourism is not going to be coming around very soon, but how do we deal with that from an economic sense? So we are looking at a much more broader, not just humanitarians in the sense of disaster, but also in the impact and the aftermath of the COVID. Just for throwing that into the group for a lot of thinking and digesting. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks. I wonder as well if, so there was the two questions posed from Tiari, and I wonder to put maybe Sandra on the spot. I see Sandra there from the head of UN Women. Sandra, I wonder if you would be able to make any comments just about from your experience and perhaps touch on the first question from Tiari about any suggestions you'd have to be able to improve this communication with the UN coordination systems of the region. And then I think we'll be wrapping up shortly, everyone.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you to the organizers. I hope everyone can hear me. It's Sandra from UN Women, and just some reflections and really also thinking about what Siale was saying as well. COVID-19 was obviously a very, very different type of emergency for all of us, and lots and lots and lots of lessons learned, and the localization agenda being, you know, absolutely key. I think you are all very well versed with the cluster system, you know, gearing up at the regional level and supporting national clusters led by government and civil society at the country level. And in theory, you know, that's how that works, that the regional architecture would support national clusters where they exist or support the development of those. That all took place and was, you know, in full steam ahead in COVID-19. I think one of the newer things that the UN tried to do this time during COVID-19 was also expand the regional cluster system to engage with a whole range of partners. And I think that to some extent that was great for information sharing. Certainly everybody could hear what the different clusters were up to, and we could hear from donor partners, government partners, civil society partners. But I think on reflection sometimes that those conversations, you know, need to be amplified and driven at the national level. And so I think, you know, that continues to be the focus. I think the national level response continues to be the paramount focus and should be the paramount focus moving forward, and really that coordination at the national level. And of course, it's across all of the different sectors. So UN Women's experience in terms of the protection cluster, really supporting partners at the national level to revise their actions, repurpose to make sure that they can do their actions remotely, especially in areas such as gender-based violence, you know, where services were moving to, you know, away from face-to-face services into online, telephone, you know, services and so on. But just reflecting on what Siale also said was, you know, when do we sort of say, no, you know, this is not a typical disaster, and so, you know, the humanitarian system isn't the best system to address this. So COVID-19 quickly turned from a, you know, a health crisis, a health emergency, a pandemic, now into a socioeconomic crisis. And so, you know, how do we transition then out of humanitarian and into the long-term development focus. And I guess my response to that is that to make sure, especially in the Pacific, you know, we're really doing a lot of thinking and planning in this area. For UN Women, from our personal experience, we're planning preparedness, resilience, response into every single project we do, because we find we're in a constant cycle of disasters. And so whether you're at the stage of risk assessment or building resilience or preparedness or responding to a disaster. So I think it's a fair question that Siale raised. We need to look at the regional and global architecture around disaster coordination. Does it suit these new situations, and does it suit the types and the intersections of disasters with socioeconomic crises? I think that you know, I welcome further conversations like this to really look at and relook at the architecture to make sure that coordination is both supporting the local agenda and being driven locally, as well as being effective and responsive. Thank you, Catherine and colleagues.
Thanks a lot, Sandra. Yeah, some great comments there, and yeah, I think this would be timely for us to look at that architecture and see how within this current situation, COVID is a great opportunity to look at how it responds and otherwise making changes to it. Some of the challenges that we've had with it to support localization in the past, now the opportunity to be able to look at those seriously. So we've run a little bit over time, and yeah, sorry.
Just a quick response from Lani, please.
Yes, sure. Lani?
Thank you. Just to comment on a point raised by Tiare of USAID in terms of prepositioning of items and also the importance of community assessment that is done, not only aerial assessment, but also at the community and individual level. On preposition of items that are used by persons with disabilities, I would like to share that this is a continued challenge for persons with disability. Even during peacetime and during disasters, it you know, adds on the need for mobility aid and devices, which is currently, it hasn't been available, having preposition of items that are used by people with disabilities, and also looking at protection and dignity packs for women and girls with disability and children with disability. Might be something that we need to seriously look at. Currently, what we have been doing is that through our organization of persons with disability, that mobility device provider, we have to work with them, but we have to wait for 2 or 3 months. Then the items is brought in from abroad through their contacts. Then we are able to then respond to the needs of people with disability on the ground if they are using mobility aid and appliances and other devices or protection or dignity packs that are generally used by people with disabilities, and it's quite costly. So and needs keep growing, even from TC Herald and now COVID. With the new normal, people with disability are more vulnerable and are of high risk of contracting COVID-19. And you know, touching on these areas, it's always something that we need to have preposition of items locally for persons with disabilities that will then solve some of these challenges of waiting for a while, then we get those items. Sometimes when we respond to their need, some of them have passed on. So these are the, the risks associated with it, and also the challenge that persons with disability continue to face. And on the other point, around community assessment, it's very important. Yeah, I do agree that the information or data gathering is also done at the individual level, because persons with disability, we have various different impairment with our different needs. So not only touching on the aerial assessment, but also at the individual level at the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lani. Great, yeah, great point there. So we've run a bit over time, so I might just wrap up from the question and answer session. Just a few points that I got out of yeah, some of that discussion. The first one around a lot of the legal frameworks and protocols, and I know this is something that came up strongly in the research on the localization, but how important these are. And Vani talked about, just by being recognised in the act, or having the role recognised, and it's the same for us in the Red Cross, that having that in there very clearly makes it much easier to be able to coordinate, to be involved. And so the more work that's done on a lot of the legal framework and protocols, the better it will be for having space for local actors and clear roles. And some work mentioned about the Fiji deal that's going through the consultation process at the moment. But there are other countries where work is being done on that as well. And there's another technical working group on risk governance that's looking at a lot of these things. The second point on coordination mechanisms came up very strongly on all the points. So both at the national level and the regional level, and the links between those. And I mean, the frameworks have to allow for those coordination mechanisms, but yeah, in this time between with the COVID and coordination under health sector, is that working between the health sector and also how we traditionally coordinate through the national disaster management structures. There's a bit of breakdown, or there has been, between some of the national coordination mechanisms. So what can be fixed at the moment to be able to prepare for the next cyclone season, which is next month for us in the South Pacific here, but to continue to work on those in a multi-hazard approach. And then the point on preparedness comes out strongly as well. There's a lot of reliance on local actors. So in the private sector, at least you mentioned that, how important it is to engage the private sector, because these are the ones that we're purchasing items off local private sector. So to be able to work with them to strengthen that, and the appropriateness of items. So Vani was talking about ensuring around people with disabilities, and also other different vulnerable groups, or different groups. We need to make sure that we have the right items there for people, and they're prepared in country already. And yeah, and I think, just my last question, I think, for everybody is, we do have a month leading up to our next cyclone season. We are facing all the socioeconomic challenges in the Pacific because of the COVID-19. So we need to be discussing how we work a bit differently to be able to prepare ourselves better for the upcoming season. So thank you from my side to all the speakers and all the participants for your discussions, and just to encourage everybody that obviously this doesn't end here, and there is a technical working group on localization of the Pacific. Everyone is welcome to participate in that, and you can contact any of the co-chairs, or you can contact the Taya from TIP, Ali from Pianga, or myself if you want to continue to be part of promoting that and working on that in the future. So thank you from my side, and over to Siali to close up.
Thank you, Catherine. Nothing more from my end. Just to thank everyone for participating. Vanessa, Vani, and Lani, Susan, thank you very much for joining in. Also to recognize the team from PIFS, Tia and William and the team. Thank you for connecting us in this platform. And for those that have been helping answer the questions, Sandra and the team, Maya and others, thank you very much. Tiare from USA, and for those of you who have been participating, joining on online, hope that you find the discussions helpful and articulating a few things that we may start or continue to think about how we can build our Pacific more resilient. This is the second sessions of the ongoing webinar. The team from PIFS continue to coordinate the next one. So be in touch with them if you are interested in the next webinar. The technical working group on humanitarian localization, if you are interested to join, please reach out to Josiah from Piango for direction and how you can join in as part of the group. Binaka Vakaleru, everyone. Good day and ofatu from Piango and our team and the technical working group and everyone. Binaka.